Once again, the weather forecast and tides were suitable for a trip up the River Blackwater on Friday the 4th of October, but only if I could either get down to the mooring on the Thursday afternoon and sail upriver on the ebb tide, returning on the Friday morning, or to sail up the river on the Friday morning and return the same day or on the Saturday. The forecast for the Saturday didn't really make this a particularly attractive option, and so I elected to go down onto the mooring on the Thursday afternoon and to make the decision whether to sail that afternoon or on the Friday morning on seeing the conditions rather than relying on the forecast. On arrival at the mooring, I found that the wind conditions were quite good for a sail, so I hastily prepared the boat, cast off the mooring and set off. The wind direction was from over Mersey, so I put up full sail, and even so only had enough wind to give steerage way as I traversed the Narrows. For once, not only did I remember to pack the cameras, but I also remembered to charge them before packing them and then get them ready before sailing. The Pocket 3 was clamped in position and started before casting off the mooring lines, and remained turned on for the entire trip up the river. So here is the exit from the Buzzon Fleet, and no, this isn't speeded up. As we sailed down the channel and out from the shelter of the island, I revised the full sail decision when a sudden gust put the lee rail under. That's the first time that's happened since I own the boat. Unfortunately, I couldn't heave to and put a reef in since I was still in the channel, and heaving to would have put us onto the mud. Instead, I let the sheets out a little to power down the sails, and continued out into the estuary, and as soon as practical put in a reef. You can see me pulling down the reefing points in the luff, and here you can see that the staysail is backed, as Naiad is hove to. I didn't bother tying up the reefing points, since the wind was forecast to abate soon. Once the reef was in, I let the staysail go over to the correct side of the boat, and Naiad started sailing forward again. The wind did indeed abate shortly after putting the reef in, and once I was sure that the gusts had also died down a bit, I took the reef out. One possibility that I entertained for a while as we sailed along was to put into St. Lawrence Creek for the night, but when we got to the entrance we were losing the daylight, and I didn't want to chance the narrow opening on a falling tide in the dark. So we pressed on to the next option, which was to pick up one of the vacant moorings at the Stone or Marconi sailing clubs. This isn't something I like to do, as it means needing to maintain an anchor watch. The tide can rip through the moorings quite fast, and it can become quite bumpy as a result. Not keeping a watch overnight on a mooring that you don't know is something that I consider foolhardy, so I don't do it. Naiad sailed serenely through both sets of moorings, doing around a knot and a half against the still ebbing tide, and I elected to head for the next available option, which was to spend the night on the mud under Stangate Abbey. Once we arrived at the point where we should turn to head into the mud flats, it was completely dark, and since I'd not seen the flats during the daylight hours, I didn't know what the mud was like. Discretion being the better part of valour, or so they say, we pressed on to a place that I knew was good. Mundon Stone Point. Yes, that place again. But this time on the outside of the point. I'd been on the mud here before and was confident that there were no obnoxious obstructions that we needed to avoid. We gently sailed onto the mud with the last of the wind, it seemed, where I took down the mainsail, furled the staysail, and having done this went forward and dropped the anchor into the foot or so of water, just to stop Naiad from sliding back off the mud and into the channel as the now flooding tide rose. Friday at 12 minutes past 8 in the morning, and I'm sitting here on the mud, or we're sitting here on the mud, on the outside of Mundon Stone Point, which you can see just over there, at least. I think it's just over there. Yep, that's it over there. As you can see, the mud is extensive just here, but pretty flat as far as you can see towards Mundon in that direction. Fairly flat all the way down to the channel, which you can see over there. This is the channel, and flat all the way. Well, it would be all the way to Stangate Abbey, which you can see right over in the far side over there, except for a Lapwing Creek. Lawling Creek, that's the Lawling Creek, which runs through there. So the mud this side of Lawling Creek is quite flat, and on the other side is quite flat as well. So a nice spot, and considering I arrived here in the middle of the night, I'm very pleased with my placement. We grounded about 8 o'clock in the evening, somewhere over there, I guess. There's a green buoy over there. We were sort of just on this side of the channel from that buoy. And then I took sail down, put the anchor out, and nosed into the mud and settled down. Basically, I slept in 15-minute increments until midnight, and when the alarm went off, I would get up and pull up the anchor, pole the boat back onto the mud, put the anchor back down again, and go back to bed. Needless to say, I didn't actually get into bed. I was just laying on top of it. No point if you were only going to be in there 15 minutes. It'd be 15 minutes nearly to get in and out again. I did that until just before midnight, when we arrived at the spot we're at now. Quite astonishing. You can imagine with the flat mud here, the tide comes in incredibly quickly, just like on the inside of the Mundon Stone Point. It rockets in. So we were aground, and the mud, the edge of the mud was, I suppose, about 10 feet away when I went down for 15-minute sleep. And when I came back, the tide was all the way up to Mundon Stone Point, the line there, and we were still only in about 2 feet of water. So I poled in as far as we could go, as far as I could get her, and then put the anchor down with enough scope for another 2 meters of tide rise, because we had a high tide, very high tide last night, and turned on the heater. There we are. You can see the chimney there. Let me just move down so you can see inside the cabin. There we are. The heater over there with a teapot on top. There's another cup of tea in there. Haven't finished the one I've got out here yet. So, and so let the scope out and went back to bed, this time for 2 hours, because high water was at 2. Came out at high water just to check that everything was all right. It was. So went back to bed again, this time until 4:30, when my calculation suggested that we would still just be afloat. I got up at 20 past just to be on the safe side, and this time my calculations were indeed absolutely correct, and we were just afloat in about 2 feet of water. So I pulled in all the excess chains, swabbed the deck. It got very muddy, and left just enough chain out so that the ebbing tide wasn't going to pull the boat in over the mud, and then went back to bed again. And at 6 o'clock came out, and there we are. That was pretty much it. So far, it's been a beautiful morning. It's freezing cold, so I'm really, really glad I had the heater on in the cabin. That's been on all night. I've gone through 3 charges of charcoal, and it is brilliantly warm down there. In fact, it's actually a little bit too warm right now. I've got the hatch open and I'm sitting outside just to cool off a bit. But I'm not going to turn the heater off. I'm going to let it keep going. So the plan from here is to wait until the tide comes back in again. That'll be around noon, and float off and sail back down to the mooring. Hopefully there'll be some wind by then. Right now, as you can probably see from the very, very calm and still waters, there's virtually no wind at all. Let's just have a look at check of the Berger up there. And it is not, well, barely flapping, just a little bit. And I can feel a breeze on my face coming from basically the direction of Maldon, which is good because I want to be going in the other direction. So it'll either be a run back down to Mersey with the tide, or the wind will get up to the forecast direction, which is southerly, so coming from over in that sort of direction, in which case it's going to be a beam reach all the way home. That would be lovely. We'd get home very fast if we did that. I kind of like the idea. So what am I going to do for the next few hours? Well, I brought my work laptop with me, would you believe? That's because I skipped off a couple of hours early to catch the tide. And I'm going to sit here in the cockpit, in the sun, and do some work that I should have done yesterday afternoon, but put off till today. Just had a slurp of my tea there. Oh, that's lovely. So, that's the plan for today. Now we'll see how it goes. If the weather permits, I like to put one of the drones up. And one of the things I like to do when the drone is up is to do a 360-degree view of what's more or less around the boat. So, starting with a view over Osey Island, and then swinging round to look along the Blackwater. That's where I shall be going a bit later on. Hopefully anyway. As you can see for the moment, there's little or no wind. So we continue swinging around, and you can see quite clearly that it is an absolutely beautiful day. I will say though that it's still quite cold despite the sun being up. So we're now swinging around looking at Lawling Creek, and there's no boats moored there at the moment, although you can see a few in the far distance in Mayland Sea. There's a marina down there somewhere, and one of these days I'll go and take a look at it. Swinging further round into Essex, and you can see the mud extending all the way down to Maldon and Heybridge. And there we swing back round into the Blackwater, and just see the tail of Osey Island coming into view now. And you can see for miles and miles and miles. The drone is up at 400 feet, which is the legal maximum for a drone. And you can see an incredibly long way. There's the boat. The tide has come in. We're still aground at this point. And just to finish off before I land the drone, you can see Mundon Stone Point. A very nice place to spend an overnight, either inside or outside on the mud. Very nice. Of course, weather permitting, you understand. At the moment, the weather permits. I set off as soon as I could, but as you can see, not a lot of wind. In fact, for the first probably nearly 2 hours, I stayed more or less in the same spot. I was moving just as fast in one direction as the tide was moving in the other. Eventually, I gave up and anchored for a bit and went and had a snooze. Things were a bit different when I got up. The wind had started to get up a little, so I upped anchor and sailed across to Osey Island. Shortly after that, the wind got up, and as you can see, things were very different. It didn't take very long to get all the way down the Blackwater, and I was pleased to note that the boat that you can see ahead, which was a good 4 times the size of Naiad, wasn't pulling away as fast as perhaps it should do. But then I was able to go very close to the shore where the tides were strongest, and the boat ahead had to stay closer to the middle channel where things weren't moving quite so fast in. It's one of the good things about sailing in the Blackwater. If you choose your tides, you can make up for being a small boat. Of course, the big boat will always win in the end, but it was encouraging to see just how well Naiad would sail when given a chance. We had a lovely sail all the way back to the fleet. The wind dropped as we got there, which was quite convenient, and we turned into the channel and headed up into the Mundon fleet. The ebb was flowing quite strongly, and I've included this clip as we go past one of the mooring buoys so that you can see just how fast the water was moving out of the Narrows as we were trying to sail in. You can see the wake the water leaves by the boat. Still, once through the Narrows, the channel widens out and the effect of the tide diminishes considerably. So now it was a case of heading close towards the mooring, which you can see with Sprite tied to it, and hope that there's enough wind to get you all the way there. Closer and closer and closer. Will I need to get the paddle out? Will I not? Will we make it? Will I have to go round again? All these questions, and I made a complete pig's ear of it, which is why I've skipped that bit. Still, managed to get the rope on the bows round the buoy. I'll pull the moorings lines in properly a bit later on, once I've tidied everything up. After this, it was merely a case of making a harbour stow of everything, putting up the bird netting, putting my dunnage into the dinghy, rowing ashore, and then driving home. A very, very nice overnight sail. I enjoyed this one greatly. I don't think there'll be many more, for the simple reason it's nearly the end of the season, and the weather is starting to get very, very cold.